So, good morning and welcome to another episode in the
Yes,
Continuing Adventures
the continuing saga.
saga, or is it Sega? No,
Sega,
that was
I
a
think
video
it's
game.
saga.
That was a video game.
Yeah.
So, distracted, anxious, and distracted. I said distracted twice, didn't I?
Yes, you did. You must be distracted.
Those are a couple of the words that come to mind for myself lately because of a topic that we want to talk about for a little while this morning: stress and anxiety
Yeah.
in everyday living. And it has to do with my elderly parents. Some of you may have elderly parents. My wife and I have two sets, one set for each of us. One set lives with us now. The other set, mine, are in the process of relocating here to be with us because they have really started to have mobility issues and so forth in the last few weeks and months. And so that has gotten kind of compiled in with the other things that we have going on and presents a brand new set of not problems, I guess challenges, issues, but there is a level of stress that comes along with it. And so we wanted to talk about that a little bit today.
Yeah, and especially, I think, have the emphasis be on how do you deal with stress? How do we deal with stress? What are good and bad ways of trying to deal with stress? You know, because there's a really wide horizon of different ways we encounter it. The other thing that I think is important to mention right off the bat is how inevitable these experiences are. I mean, they're part of everyone's life. And yes, some people perhaps have them more frequently and more intensely than others do, but pretty much every one of us is caught in the web of, you know, an anxiety-ridden, stress-ridden existence to a certain extent.
There was a gentleman, Dr. Wayne Oates. I had him for a class or two back in the 80s, and he talked about a concept called anticipatory grief, which I have subsequently encountered several times in different contexts. But that was the first time I had heard that. And even if you anticipate not just a grieving, but a change of life kind of situation, well, my wife and I have seen this coming. We've known about it. We've known it was inevitable. We had planned for it. It was even our idea to make it happen. But still, now that it's in process, there's a whole range of contingencies and uncertainties and variables to contend with, some of which we expected, many of which we did not, and so that does present a challenge in how you take this up in day-to-day life.
Oh yeah, very much so. And you know, one thought that I'm having right now is that in a way, you know, when you think about stress, there's kind of a sort of telescoping sort of set of phenomena that organize around stress. For instance, anxiety is one form of stress. There are other forms of stress, of course. And so, in a way, anxiety and how we deal with anxiety would be sort of one particular instance of stress. But then I think there's sort of a superordinate concept, which would be hardship in my mind. Like, how do you deal with hardship more generally, of which stress is just one kind? There are other forms of hardship. So, you know, part of the question, I think, is like very general, like how do we deal with hardship in general? Then it's sort of a more specific question is how do we deal with the kinds of hardships that are stressful? And then a more specific question yet would be how do we deal with the stresses that are anxiety ridden specifically?
Well, that's an interesting point because that makes me think of two different things. One is the way that stress and anxiety can manifest itself through the body in various physical ailments.
Oh yeah.
people come away with ulcers, or people turn to alcohol, or people turn to drugs, or any number of changes in behavior. But then the other complete, very different thought that came to my mind too when you were talking is one way that I have taken this up is to embrace it, and not to discount it or marginalize it or run away from it metaphorically. Is just to literally embrace it as an inevitable, and even in a way enviable moment in life.
Yeah, enviable because it can sort of invite you or invite us to change and grow and adapt ourselves.
It can, and also enviable in that I'm 55 and I still have my 85-year-old parents with me.
Well, there you go. Like, in a way, what a blessing to have to undergo that stress.
Yeah. So there are lots of facets to this kind of a thing. But then to finish up this second thought that I had is one other thing that it's done is it has sort of propelled me more into my the quiet time that I have, the mindfulness kinds of moments that I have. I have a practice of that has really come out of my study and interest in Jung, of drawing mandalas as a sort of a mindfulness practice, a centering, active imagination practice, and I've given more attention to that, and I've also noticed myself being more aware and conscious of the value of those moments, those periods of time that I take a few times a week to sit and be with that material and to contemplation.
Right. Well, I think your general strategy, Mark, about trying as best you can to embrace and actually enter into the experience of stress is a pretty good strategy for dealing with it. And part of the reason why is because, when we're hell-bent on trying to make things less stressful, when we're trying to sort of reconfigure our lives so that whatever it is that seems to be causing the stress is no longer there. Well, guess what? That itself can be a form of stress. Yeah. Resisting stress is itself a form of stress. So if there's anything that makes, I think, stress worse or exacerbates it, it would be our resistance to stress, because then we not only have the stressful experience, but we have the additional stress of resisting the stress.
Right. And there are all these little colloquialisms, these little cliches and metaphors that are in the common language of, like the little signs that you see on eBay. I mean, not eBay, on the internet. I've come to the point in my life where I've realized that I'm not going to let all these things get me down, and and so forth and so forth. Life is, and it goes on with all these things that I'm going to do. Life is too short to be anything but happy. Mm-hmm. Well, to me, that is almost like a bypassing.
Yeah.
Because all of those things in the middle are inevitable, and we're inextricably drawn into life, and by being in life, we can't help but be in both the good and the bad.
Yeah. It's so tempting, I think, for us, because we're human, to want to just put sort of all of our chips, if we can, on the side of the positive and the happy and the constructive and all of that, and not in a way give the devil his due, because I think you're right that, like, part of what we're here to experience, this seems like an obvious point of life, is not only all those upbeat, positive, cheery sides, but all of their antithesis too. So all of the hardship, all of the negativity, all of the upset, all of the anxiety is part of our human experience as well. And so, like, when we resist the parts of life we don't like. In a way, we're sort of dishonoring half of what life is, half of what we're here to experience. And suppose that we were able to somehow get rid of our stress and get rid of our anxiety. Would that make our lives better? And I think the answer is not necessarily clear at the very least, because like to me, like life is beautiful and interesting and powerful and strange and so on, precisely because it's a very broad experience, precisely because we are challenged by difficulty and darkness and weirdness and so on.
And so while you're talking about that, I'm thinking about two things that I've heard you talk about before. One is the myth of Sisyphus, from that was Camus that wrote that little book, of that myth of Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, almost getting up the hill, and it goes back down. But there's a determination and this is the hardship of it is part of the realness of being alive in the world, and the doing of it anyway, in spite of.
But now on the other side, I would say that it takes real courage to affirm life.
Yeah,
and by that I mean not just the positive parts of life that we can all easily affirm. It's like you count up how many great pizzas you had and how many orgasms you had, and you say, well, life is affirmable. And it's like, well, that's not the real challenge. The challenge is not to affirm all the nicey parts. The challenge is to look at the whole picture and be realistic about what life is, and find a way of affirming the grand totality.
There's sadness in it, there's grief in it, there's joy, there's
pain.
Love, there's pain and suffering, but it's all part. It's no part of it is meant to be discounted, marginalized, done away with, denied, pretend that it's not there, it doesn't exist, but rather to be embraced. All of it.
Yeah, I think that's what we're here to experience. So I think the point of life, contrary to some philosophical traditions, is not to be happy. The point of human existence is not for us to be happy. The point of human existence is for us to experience the wide horizon of what there is to experience, to deny none of it, to try to erase none of it.
Because if you can get to that point, and then go through that, there's more of an authenticity, I think, out the other side. If you can go through without trying to bypass, without trying to circumvent the sadness or the grief or the hardship or the pain.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I've discovered, and I bet you have too, Mark, is that even the worst kinds of suffering, but as I think back on my own life, like some of the things that were hardest to get through, always after a time had a kind of gift to offer. There was, and it can take a while to realize this, because the reason why is because when we go through a hard time, the pain can be so overwhelming and so great that we lose our sort of greater perspicacity. But over time, I think every single hardship, even the deaths of people that I care about, and the suffering of my own suffering and the suffering of people I care about, has always eventually had a kind of weird gift, like it always had something to offer, some way of sort of making life more interesting or more subtle or more tricky or more intricate somehow.
The key to that, though, I think, is it only is a gift if one is open to receive it.
Well, that's the thing.
And that's the tricky part.
Yes, that is the tricky part, because it's way easier to say that we're open than it actually is to be open. A lot of times we lie to ourselves too about how open we are.
Yeah.
We'd like to think of ourselves as open beings, but I think every human being has a certain ambivalence about being open as opposed to being closed, and we're all closed in various ways too.
Well, and it is fascinating the way the human creature functions, because I see all the time these posts about asking for prayers because of some hardship that this person is going through, that everything will work out. And pretty much invariably what they mean is that it will all turn out in a positive way to their benefit.
Yeah.
That the test results will come back negative, that the operation won't be necessary, that the move across the country won't have to happen, that all of this, there's this almost a cultural kind of bias toward the easy and the good and the positive and the happy and the rather than the greater good, which contains, I think that it's wrapped up in the polar opposites.
Well, I think so too, because I think the ultimate greater good is to live a human life.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I mean, a full human life, not a partial or restricted or constricted or constipated human life, but like the full range of what there is to drink in here.
Yeah, there's a restaurant in town. I can't remember which one it is, but there's a little sign on the wall in there that says, "Of all the things that you can be, human is best."
That's not bad.
And
That's not bad.
I've always liked that, and I think about that a lot because the human is considering all of the opposites and all of the spectrum in between and embracing all of it. So that's, I guess, for a challenge for us today and for all of you, is that we embrace everything about a situation, not just wishing and hoping and praying and striving for an easy, peaceful, happy resolution.
Yeah. And I think one way toward that, at least for me, is to cultivate a kind of mindful awareness of what's actually unfolding in the present, whatever it is, whether it's pleasurable or unpleasurable, and to cultivate the capacity, especially to live through unpleasant moments with a full mindful awareness, because when we're mindfully aware that we're suffering, I think we're much closer to being able to embrace it, to see it for what it is. And what it is just another part of life, another part of the human equation, another experience, not terribly pleasant. Probably we want to run from it, that's all given. But in the final analysis, it's just part of the ride.
It's part of the ride, yeah, indeed. And what a ride.
What a ride. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed our little discussion today and find it perhaps applicable or useful somehow, or if not useful, at least interestingly useless.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you next time.
Yes, take care.